but everybody seems to be in for some economic pain. How economically painful is it going to get for people in this country? And I do have one more question.
First of all, there's no doubt that when a major nuclear power attacks and invades another country, that the world is going to respond, and markets can respond all over the world. So there's no doubt about that, number one. Number two, the notion that this is going to last for a long time is highly unlikely as long as we continue to stay resolved in imposing the sanctions we're going to impose on Russia, period. What's the next question? I'm sorry.
The next question is, did you underestimate Putin, and would you still describe him the way that you did in the summer as a worthy adversary?
At the time, he was, I made it clear, as an adversary, and I said he was worthy. I didn't underestimate him. And I've read most of everything he's written. Did you read the, I shouldn't, I'm not being a wise guy. You heard the speech he made, almost an hour's worth of speeches, why he was going into Ukraine. He has much larger ambitions in Ukraine. He wants to, in fact, reestablish the former Soviet Union. That's what this is about. And I think that his ambitions are completely contrary to the place where the rest of the world has arrived.
You're confident that these devastating sanctions are going to be as devastating as Russian missiles and bullets and tanks?
Yes, Russian bullets, missiles, and tanks in Ukraine. Yes, I am.
Thank you, President Biden. If sanctions cannot stop President Putin, what penalty can?
I didn't say sanctions couldn't stop him.
You've been talking about the threat of these sanctions for several weeks now.
Yes, but the threat of the sanctions and imposing the sanctions and seeing the effect of the sanctions are two different things. They're two different things. And we're now he's going to begin to see the effect of the sanctions.
And what will that do? How will that change his mindset here, given he's attacking Ukraine
Because it will so weaken his country that he'll have to make a very, very difficult choices of whether to continue to move toward being a second-rate power or, in fact, respond.
You said in recent weeks that big nations cannot bluff when it comes to something like this. You recently said that the idea of personally sanctioning President Putin was on the table. Is that a step that you're prepared to take? And if not—
It's not a bluff, it's on the table.
Sanctioning President Putin?
Yes.
Why not sanction him today, sir?
Mr. President?
Why not sanction him today, sir?
Mr. President, if I can, you detailed some severe and swift new sanctions today and said the impact it will have over time. But given the full-scale invasion, given that you're not pursuing disconnecting Russia from what's called SWIFT, the international banking system, or other sanctions at your disposal, respectfully, sir, what more are you waiting for?
Specifically, with the sanctions we've imposed exceed SWIFT. The sanctions we imposed exceed anything that's ever been done. The sanctions we imposed have generated 2/3 of the world joining us. They are profound sanctions. Let's have a conversation in another month or so to see if they're working. Yes.
Can I ask you about Zelensky? Sir, you spoke to Vladimir Zelensky yesterday, sir.
What's the risk that we are watching the beginning of another Cold War, and is there now a complete rupture in U.S. and Russian relations?
There is a complete rupture right now in U.S.-Russian relations if they continue on this path that they're on. And in terms of a Cold War, that depends. You have the vast majority of the rest of the world in total opposition to what he's doing, from Asia to South America to Europe to around the world. And so it's going to be a cold day for Russia. The idea, you don't see a whole lot of people coming to his defense.
And are you, if I could follow up, sir, are you urging China to help isolate Russia? Are you urging China to help isolate Russia?
I'm not prepared to comment on that at the moment. No. Yeah. No. He's had his hand up a long time.
Thank you, Mr. President. How concerned are you that Putin wants to go beyond Ukraine into other countries, and the U.S. will have to get involved if he moves into NATO countries?
Well, if he did move into NATO countries, he will be involved. We will be involved. The only thing that I'm convinced of is if we don't stop now, he'll be emboldened. If we don't move against him now with these significant sanctions, he will be emboldened. And look, You know, well, anyway.
And can you talk anything more about your conversation? Mr. President.
Why not sanction Putin directly today?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Sir, India, which is a major defense partner of the United States, is India fully with you on the issue of Ukraine and Russia?
Does the Defense Department of the United States?
Sir, India is one of your major defense partners. Is India fully in sync with the United States on Russia?
We're in consultation with India today. We haven't resolved that completely.
One more question.
Okay, thank you all very much. Thank you.
There we are, Joe Biden at the White House. You're watching a special program on the Ukraine crisis, which today became the Ukraine war. Let's go live to the White House and US correspondent Mark Stone. And Mark, eventually, after, 13 or 14 hours, we see and hear from Joe Biden. What did you make of what he had to say?
Well, many audiences that he was speaking to, he had to present a united Western Front, and I think he did, but he did not announce the rest or the full raft of sanctions that some have been calling for him to do, given what happened last night. He was asked repeatedly about this idea of cutting Russia off from the SWIFT banking system, and he made the point that actually others have been making through the course of the day that this SWIFT banking system idea could be somewhat of a red herring. The raft of other sanctions against individual banks with huge reserves outside of the Russian Federation could have as much or more impact. That was certainly his argument. He spent the first half of that statement merely reminding people of the gravity of the moment, of what had happened, of the fact that the United States had been warning that this would happen for so many months now, and that his intelligence had got it bang on, that precisely what they warned would happen did happen. And then he outlined the raft of sanctions that he says the United States and the European Union, the UK and others would now impose on Russia. The subtext of what he was saying seemed to be that this will be a very, very difficult few months, maybe longer, for Ukraine, and that the fact is Russia is in the process of occupying Ukraine. He didn't say as much, but that seemed to be the subtext. But he made the point that Russia will feel the consequences of that decision for many, many years to come. Vladimir Putin will, he said, be a pariah. He also outlined a plan to not only buttress the eastern frontier of NATO even more, with forces right now, American forces moving from Western Europe into countries on the east, but he talked too about more American troops moving from the United States to Germany to backfill those that are moving east. He made absolutely clear that while Ukraine may have been occupied now by Russian forces, there is no prospect of any NATO member country coming into contact with Russia without Article 5 being triggered. Article 5, an attack on one is an attack on all. That is why he said American troops are moving to the east of NATO, the NATO territory. And once again, he made a point he has made so many times, Mark. There is no prospect of American troops moving into Ukraine. Why? Well, quite simply because Russia is a nuclear power, and we all heard what President Putin said in his statement last night, a very ominous threat to the West.
Absolutely. Mark Stone, thank you very much indeed. So what began as shelling in Ukraine's disputed regions has grown into an invasion from the north, the south and the east. It is the biggest attack on a European country since the Second World War and Moscow's most aggressive action since the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan back in 1979. Russia has confirmed a ground incursion from Crimea in the south, while a spokesman for Ukraine's president says the Chernobyl nuclear power plant is now under Russian control in the north, and paratroopers seized an airfield just outside Kyiv, although President Zelensky's office says that is now back under Ukrainian control. In a moment, we'll hear from our correspondents across Ukraine and in Moscow with Alex Rossi in Mariupol, John Sparks in Kharkiv and Diana Magnay in the Russian capital. But first, our main report tonight comes from Sky's chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey, here in Kyiv.
Here we go.
It started before dawn. Ukraine woke to explosions around the capital, Kyiv. It was the same across the country. These pictures from Kharkiv in the east. Enormous blasts, also in the city of Dnipro. Air raid sirens blared out across the capital. Above the clouds, a fighter jet soared over our heads, Russian or Ukrainian, we don't know which. This was to be a day of targeted attacks by the Russian forces.
Whoever tries to hinder us, and even more so to create threats to our country, to our people, should know that Russia's response will be immediate, and it will lead you to such consequences that you have never encountered in your history.
Shocked witnesses filmed this video of missiles hitting the Ivano-Frankivsk airport in the country's west. Russia appeared to be targeting essential infrastructure, helicopter gunships hovering above a power plant. Other power stations were targeted as well, including the Chernobyl nuclear power station, raising fears of an even greater disaster. Ukraine's president held an emergency meeting with his top staff, pledging the fight will go on.
What Ukrainians should do: help the national defense, join the national armed forces, territorial defense. Anyone with experience in the army. It's really important, and we will not let the enemy go any further on our territory.
Russian armoured personnel carriers and other military vehicles crossed the border from Belarus into Ukraine as President Putin's forces attempted to take control. Military trucks also seen heading north from Crimea, annexed in 2014. And tanks rolled through the cities, including Sumy, heralding a new phase in this escalating crisis.
We now have war in Europe on a scale and of a type we thought belonged to history. NATO allies condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine in the strongest possible terms. It is a blatant violation of international law.
In the capital, streets usually teeming with people became quiet. Not deserted, but fundamentally different to just 24 hours earlier. Within hours, it was clear a mass exodus had started. This man and his family told us they'd tried to get onto a train heading west. He said he was giving up, though, and going home. Without a car, you're stuck, he told me. The main roads heading out of Kiev were suddenly jammed with traffic. Miles and miles of queues. People getting out of buses for a break before continuing on. These women said they and everyone on the bus was heading to the west, and maybe then onto Poland and safety.
Well, for weeks now, people have been telling us that nothing's going to happen, that they're going to stay in Kiev, they're going to stay in their homes. But it has happened, and this is the effect. It's log-jammed here. This is the main road to western Ukraine. As you can see, we're in a massive, massive parking lot now.
Queues began to form outside petrol stations and then at banks and cash machines, people withdrawing their savings and attempting to head away from the Russian forces. There has been plenty of defiance in Ukraine in recent days. On the streets, a few hardy souls came out to support the nation, the flag carried with pride. But in the face of the Russian army, there's not much more that they can do. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News, Kiev.
Well, heavy fighting has been reported in Mariupol in southeast Ukraine, one of the first areas hit when the invasion began this morning. The city is home to Ukraine's main port and lies just 6 miles from the Donbass region, which has areas controlled by pro-Russian separatists. Sky correspondent Alex Rossi reports now from Mariupol.
It is a terrifying constant thunder, explosions booming across this coastal city. It's been going on for hours now. And this is a population in shock. They just stop and stand, traumatized by a war they did not start and do not want. In the distance, artillery rains down on Ukrainian positions. The defense of the outskirts may not last long. Some families grab what they can. This little girl carries her bucket and spade. There have already been attacks on civilian areas, this place targeted by rockets, presumably to terrorize the population.
Happened about half an hour ago. Lots of people live here. Quite a few of the windows of the houses have been blown out by the blast. The front lines are over in that direction.
There is a huge amount of destruction here, and people are worried there could be another salvo at any time.
You see all the broken glass and brickwork down here. This is where this man lives.
Jacob shows me inside his house. It's been wrecked. His great-grandson was hit by shrapnel as he slept.
13 лет. 13 лет. Кисть вот так. Вот, смотрите, кровь какая, вот.
There are still signs of life in the city centre, but this is not normal. They're trying to get supplies. No one here knows when the Russians will arrive, but they can hear the fighting is getting closer.
There is a feeling of absolute dread in this city. Over the last 5 minutes, we've heard the sound of very intense artillery barrages on the outskirts. Now, some people are coming out. You can hear it there. They're queuing at this ATM for money. They're also stocking up on supplies at the supermarket, checking their phones, calling their relatives, really worried about what is going to happen next.
In the queue, waiting patiently, we find Margarita. She's frightened, but defiant.
Конечно, оставаться. Мы город не собираемся покидать. Это наша страна, это наш город, мы его любим.
Ukrainian forces are trying to fight, setting up positions now inside the city. But as we filmed, the war felt very close. With bombs dropping, families hunker down in damp and gloomy basements. They don't know when this storm of fire will pass. Ludmila, a mother of two, still can't understand why Russia wants to destroy her country.
Мы уже через такое прошли в 2014 году. Лучше побыстрее это все закончилось. Людей в покое оставить.
Ukraine is a nation of suffering. The next hours will be filled with misery and fear as people cower in the dark from Vladimir Putin's war machine. Alex Rossi, Sky News, Mariupol.
Well, in Kharkiv, in eastern Ukraine, roads were blocked as residents tried to flee the closest city to the Russian border. Many of those who stayed took shelter in subway stations or queued at hospitals to donate blood. Kharkiv, the country's second largest city, is less than 20 miles away from Russia. Large explosions have been heard near the city since the early hours of this morning. Sky correspondent John Sparks reports now from Kharkiv.
The people of Kharkiv now live a new reality. Their city under siege by an enemy unseen. And the front line isn't far. The Russian military sits on its northern outskirts. They awoke with a shock in the center of this city. Vladimir Putin's operation is real, not imagined. How are you feeling this morning?
Тревожно. Все знают, какие новости, и, в принципе, как и все эти люди, ожидают плохих новостей.
They don't usually queue for the local supermarket, but today was anything but normal. Elena took her prayer book on the morning shop.
Я прошу Бога нам помочь. Сохранить нам жизнь, сохранить нашу страну, наш город.
In Kharkiv, the competition for petrol and diesel is fierce, for many are trying to leave the city. Alexandra and her partner began to pack after the first artillery shells hit the city.
We woke up at 5 o'clock from these hits, yeah? And we were very stressed and worried, so we didn't have enough time to take these clothes or something like that, just the most important things. Even I don't know if I took everything important, or but may God help me and may God help all of us. This is the only one thing what I can say.
There are queues everywhere for shops, supermarkets, pharmacies, and the occasional thud of artillery here in the city's northern suburbs. Incoming shells, they're not far away. The Ukrainian army has taken up positions on the city's outskirts, but their personnel are badly outnumbered. The Russian military crossed the frontier through multiple checkpoints and shelled this residential neighborhood in a place called Chuhuyev. The fire service said a boy was killed in the attack. This country knows the price it is likely to pay, and the people of Kharkiv are getting prepared. The largest line we witnessed was formed by those who wanted to give blood.
Я не маю бойового досвіду, я не можу захищати країну зі зброєю в руках, і все, що я можу зробити для того, щоб тут, в принципі, був мир, хоч скільки можна, щоб втримались наші бійці, які там ось поруч захищають зараз.
The blood clinic's manager, Yuri Vahavenko, took us for a tour. He said he hadn't seen it this busy since the beginning of the conflict with Russia in 2014. I'm just doing my job, he said. The heroes here are those who give blood. At the central train station, life-changing decisions are made in an instant. City residents, Alina and Yuri, will seek shelter in neighboring Poland, and they worry they'll never return.
Верить в себя и сражаться, я надеюсь, что наша армия сможет достойно это пройти.
John Sparks, Sky News, in Kharkiv, eastern Ukraine.
Well, I'm joined now by Alex Rossi in Mariupol, by John in Kharkiv, but first Stuart Ramsey here in Kyiv. And Stuart, it would seem tonight that Russian troops are fighting their way towards this capital city. Give us a sense of the mood here tonight.
Very, very quiet. Actually, sorry, it's a bit deafening at the moment because this is a convoy of military vehicles that have been just passing us for the last few seconds or so. I can't see if there's men in them. They look like troop transporters. But apart from that, it's absolutely dead quiet here. This was really busy yesterday. People are out, restaurants open, all now completely shut. There's going to be a curfew starting at the top of the hour, so that was to be expected. But what a change, Mark, we have seen in this one day. Absolutely everyone is staying indoors. People are very, very scared about what's happening, and there is that sense that the Russians are getting nearer and nearer all the time.
Stuart, thank you very much. Let's speak to Alex Rossi in Mariupol. And Alex, just give us a sense of the strategic importance of that port city where you are.
Well, Mark, we are in the southeast corner of Ukraine. It is a place that will almost certainly be taken in this Russian invasion by forces pushing in from Western Russia, from the areas at the moment held by Russian-backed separatists. But the other fear is, of course, that there are columns of armour moving up from the Crimea, which have already entered Ukraine, and they will kettle the soldiers already here. But it's a mixture really here of fear and defiance. People are absolutely terrified about what is going to unfold over the next few hours and days. It's a very moody place at the moment. We are under curfew. We've had to move from the position that we were in on the coast because there are no lights allowed on the front because there's a fear it could draw attention from the Russian forces and potentially draw fire. So people just don't really know what to expect at all. I think the other thing to note, of course, is that where we are is within the Donetsk region, the Donetsk Oblast. Now, that's as far as Vladimir Putin is concerned, although it's occupied at the moment and under the control of Ukrainian soldiers, he believes that this belongs to Russian-backed separatists. So I think it is almost certainly that the forces will arrive here. They're very close to the city at the moment. We heard some thunderous bangs on the outskirts where the Ukrainian forces have dug in. But people here really are kind of holding their breath. It is just a matter of time.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Alex, thank you very much. And finally to John Sparks in Kharkiv. And John, I mean, so close to the Russian border, this promises to be a very unnerving night for the people there.
That's absolutely right, Mark. The second unnerving night, because the artillery barrage began at 5 a.m. This morning. So there are a lot of people who haven't had a whole lot of sleep. People know that they are vulnerable here. We are so close to the border. It's just 20 miles away. You can drive there in less than an hour, and they've had to listen to this thud, thud, thud through the day and well into the night, and we've been listening to it just as we've been waiting to speak to you. And you're right, it's really unnerving. And people have been having to make these really difficult decisions throughout the day. Do they stay at home? Do they try and get out? Do they go to the petrol station, queue up for hours? And we saw people with their bags in the back of vehicles telling us they were desperate to go out. And the trains are still running here. So there are a lot of people at the central station, people trying to get to Moldova in the south, or people trying to make a very long trip to Poland in the west. The president of Poland has said he will welcome refugees from Ukraine. They can come. So people are having to make these really difficult decisions, and they're having to make them in an instant. So a very difficult day here.
Yeah. OK, John, thank you very much indeed. And thank you to Alex Rossi in Mariupol and Stuart Ramsey here in Kiev. So it's a fast-moving and changing situation here. Michael Clark, Professor of War Studies, can tell us now what we know so far.
24 hours ago, we were wondering if the military movement might be restricted to the Donbass. But now that we know that Mr. Putin is going for broke, he's invading the whole country in a multi-pronged attack. It started in the Donbass region to the east, but from Kyiv in the north, Lviv in the west to Odessa in the south, there's now been over 200 attacks taking place since the start of the day, according to the Ukrainian National Police Service. So let's look at Kharkiv first, the most vulnerable of the big cities in Ukraine, near the Russian border with lots of Russian speakers. It's not surprising, perhaps, that Russian forces are about to surround this city. So far, Russian military attacks look as if they're only against the Ukrainian military, and they're probably hoping that they'll be able to walk into undamaged cities that won't try to defend themselves when they do. We've seen footage appearing to show the aftermath of an attack on an airbase in Lviv, near Kharkiv. Sky News has gone through an extensive verification process to corroborate this video. You'll see two impacts. That's to be expected, as missile attacks almost always involve sending 2 missiles to each target. That's in order to achieve something close to a 95% chance of success. We can see the before and after with these latest satellite images released by communication services monitoring the situation. The first image taken on Monday, and in this one from today, where you can see clearly the aftermath of the attack. Now to the west, and what should be the safest city in Ukraine, Lviv. Far to the west, not part of an industrial area and close to the Polish border. Well, it may soon find itself hosting an unknown number of refugees. 80 miles south, we've seen video of another missile hitting an airbase there. Here, the Ukrainian airbase in Ivano-Frankivsk, 83 miles south of Lviv. It was hit by what looks to be a cruise missile. And in the southwest of Ukraine is Odessa, a historic city, subject to a missile attack where at least 18 people have been killed. It's a significant port complex, important for Russian forces to control it if they're trying to take the whole country. In fact, a Turkish ship en route from Odessa to Romania was hit by a bomb on Thursday afternoon. In addition, Ukrainian authorities say that parts of the Kherson region along the Crimea's coast, northern coast, are no longer under their control. So the big question now is what happens in Kyiv, home to nearly 3 million people. We've heard reports of a number of attacks on all sides. 2 power plants, one in the south of the city and Chernobyl to the north, as well as a military base in neighbouring Gostomel. All examples of being hit by Russian forces trying to paralyse the infrastructure. Russia's attack is engaged in a multi-pronged offensive. Now, there's a certain degree of risk in this, given the distribution of the forces that the Russians have put into the field. If Mr. Putin is going to succeed in the way he seems to expect, then he'll probably have to do it quickly.
Michael Clark there. Well, in many ways, this is an invasion the West saw coming, but was powerless to stop. It happened in plain sight, a build-up of troops and tanks that took place over almost 4 months, with Joe Biden warning weeks ago that Vladimir Putin would move into Ukraine. The question now is what exactly Putin wants to achieve and how far he will go to achieve it. Our Moscow correspondent Diana Magne reports now on Putin's plans.
And so it began, the invasion he claimed again and again that he had no intention of making.
Защита людей, которые на протяжении 8 лет подвергаются издевательствам, геноциду со стороны киевского режима. И для этого мы будем стремиться к демилитаризации и денацификации Украины.
And then, somewhat surreally, it was business as usual, a meet and greet with Pakistan's president, as though he hadn't just authorized what could be the biggest military invasion since World War II, and justified it as though he was taking on Nazi Germany.
How far is Vladimir Putin prepared to go in Ukraine, do you think?
First operation is crashing aviation and the anti-missile system. Also, then Ukrainian army should be surrounded and disarmed. All neo-Nazi groups, I think, should be crashed. And formation of new system of power. I suppose that Zelensky will leave Kyiv in a couple of days from now.
Decisive and immediate action was needed, the state newscasters say. Against Ukrainian aggression, they insist. As footage shows fighters on the front line declaring they'll take this land. And many people back home believe the narrative.
Россия действует правильно. Значит, не надо было издеваться над своим народом, над украинским. Поэтому они получили то, что сейчас есть.
And he said over and over again that he had no intention of invading, and now he's invading. What do you make of that?
Well, he has to react. He has to help the people in the Donbass region. I would say by saying that he's not intending to invade, it means that he's not intending to occupy.
But public opinion's a mixed bag.
It's awful, and I'm really sorry, and it's really, really sad. But I can do with this nothing. Yeah, we can only sorry.
In the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin met his key businessmen to work through how to weather the sanctions storm.
Western leaders have tried to emphasize that they have no quarrel with the Russian people. The trouble is the long-term economic consequences of the squeeze of the toughest sanctions the West can muster will be felt by the people, and that will most likely consolidate anti-Western sentiment, which is pretty strong as it is.
And there are plenty who don't like what's happening here. Anti-war protests in more than 20 cities across Russia swiftly shut down by police, with more than 1,000 detained. No war with Ukraine, this sign says, but it's too late for that. Diana Magne, Sky News, Moscow.
And Diana joins me now live from Moscow. And Diana, it seems that he simply wants Ukraine under his control and to hell with the consequences.
That's what it feels like. I spoke to Two analysts today, Sergei Markov, who you heard from there, and another, both of whom said that his goal was regime change. And I think when you look at the terminology that he's using, demilitarization and denazification, you hear this over and over again as though Ukraine is awash with far-right extremists, which it is not. There are, of course, far-right elements. There is the Azov battalion that has been fighting against the separatists for many years now, but it is not a government ruled by far-right nationalists, which is the way that Vladimir Putin likes to depict it to his people. And I think that when he talks about denazifying the country, he means taking out the leadership and putting them on trial. And Sergei Markov incredibly menacingly said that he thought that neo-Nazis would be taken away and killed. The other analyst I spoke to said that he thought that they would be simply imprisoned. But yes, it would appear that the objective is a replacement of the government in Kyiv to one that is friendly to Moscow, and for Russia to establish what President Putin clearly believes is his rightful hold over that part of the world. But as you saw in that report, there are many people here who are deeply unhappy with the decision that he's taken, who feel that it should not have been done in his name. I don't think that we're going to have a Crimea effect like we did after 2014, where his popularity rose sharply. I think you're going to be seeing a lot more of those protests, even though going out to protest can often mean you just get bundled in the back of a police van.
OK, Diana, thank you very much indeed. Well, our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, is with me now. Let's talk about Chernobyl, first of all, under Russian control tonight.
Yes, it's a key point of access to the capital here. It's the shortest direct route for troops. We knew they were massing on the other side of the border in Belarus, and there's been heavy fighting there today. We had the Ukrainian president coming out and talking about it, but it seems that the Russian troops, we've been told now, control that area, a hugely dangerous area anyway, the Chernobyl disaster, one of the biggest man-made disasters of our times. Now under Russian control, it means that Russia now has that direct route to Kyiv, should it choose to do that. But interesting that here we are more than, coming up to nearly the first day of this invasion in terms of the 24-hour cycle, and yet they haven't yet moved on Kyiv. And it's important to note, for an invading force, it's much harder to attack than it is to defend. And we are seeing the Ukrainian military defending tonight.
Well, we know it is the invasion's underway, and it is a big attack. What is coming?
Well, if it carries on like this, we can expect more airstrikes tonight. We woke up this morning, didn't we, to the sound of booms in the distance, with precision missile strikes, airstrikes going after key military infrastructure, command and control centres, air defence systems. They will run out of targets at some point if they can continue with that tempo, but they're trying to cripple the Ukrainian military's ability to defend themselves. But it is important to note that there is a lot of resistance. There are heavy casualties on both sides, and a Ukrainian official has said today that they have the manpower to resist this invasion, but they are worried about running out of supplies, including ammunition and other weapons.
All right, Deborah, thank you very much. Well, today, Western leaders spoke with one voice, imposing fresh sanctions on Russia in the hope that these measures will force President Putin to think twice. Announcing new sanctions at the White House earlier, President Biden called this a dangerous moment for Europe, but said that freedom will prevail.
Putin is the aggressor. Putin chose this war, and now he and his country will bear the consequences. Today, I'm authorizing additional strong sanctions and new limitations on what can be exported to Russia. This is going to impose severe cost on the Russian economy, both immediately and over time. We have purposefully designed these sanctions to maximize the long-term impact on Russia and to minimize the impact on the United States and our allies. The next few weeks and months will be hard on the people of Ukraine. Putin has unleashed a great pain on them. But the Ukrainian people have known 30 years of independence. And they've repeatedly shown that they will not tolerate anyone who tries to take their country backwards. This is a dangerous moment for all of Europe, for the freedom around the world. Putin has committed an assault on the very principles that uphold the global peace. But now, the entire world sees clearly what Putin and his Kremlin allies are really all about. This was never about a genuine security concerns on their part. It was always about naked aggression, about Putin's desire for empire by any means necessary.
Well, earlier, Boris Johnson vowed to cripple the Russian economy as he imposed new sanctions in response to the invasion, calling Vladimir Putin a blood-stained aggressor. The Prime Minister announced plans to exclude Russian banks from the UK and limit the money held in bank accounts by Russian nationals. Also, a government source says Foreign Secretary Liz Truss kicked the Russian ambassador out of a meeting earlier, telling him he should be ashamed of himself. Our political editor Beth Rigby reports now on the UK response.
A dark day for Europe and for the decision makers, not just in this street, but for people beyond it too. Ukrainians gathered here in protest and in solidarity with their countrymen under fire. The gravity encapsulated in this national address, the Prime Minister dubbing Russia a pariah state.
President Putin of Russia has unleashed war in our European continent. He's attacked a friendly country without any provocation and without any credible excuse. Our mission is clear. Diplomatically, politically, economically, and eventually militarily, this hideous and barbaric venture of Vladimir Putin must end in failure. In concert with our allies, we will agree a massive package of economic sanctions designed in time to hobble the Russian economy. I say to the Ukrainians in this moment of agony, we are with you. We're praying for you and your families, and we are on your side. And if the months ahead are grim and the flame of freedom burns low, I know that it will blaze bright again in Ukraine.
The magnitude of this situation etched on the faces of ministers.
Ambassador, is Russia a pariah state? Are you scared of sanctions, Ambassador?
The Russian ambassador summoned to the Foreign Office, but the meeting lasting less than 10 minutes. Diplomacy exhausted. The focus now on sanctions and military support as decades of peace in Europe give way to war. Early evening and the PM to the Commons laying out the severity of his sanctions, trade restrictions, asset freezes, Russian aircraft banned and new legislation promised within days.
Today, the UK is announcing the largest and most severe package of economic sanctions that Russia has ever seen. We will continue on a remorseless mission to squeeze Russia from the global economy piece by piece.
Cabinet ministers with their heads hung low. The severity of the situation written across his face, and today MPs across this House in rare agreement. The Prime Minister listening.
Will my right honourable friend confirm that the government is putting in place every possible economic sanction so that Russia feels absolutely the cold wind of isolation?
All of us who believe in democracy over dictatorship, in the rule of law over the reign of terror, in freedom over the jackboot of tyranny, must unite and take a stand.
Today, Russia upturned decades of peace as it launched one of the biggest military offences that Europe's seen since the Second World War. An invasion long feared, it was nevertheless shocking when it came. So now the sanctions ratchet up. But Western leaders know in reality they have little hope of changing the course of this conflict in the coming days as they bed in for a protracted crisis. The close of a day that will change the course of this century. Superpowers that have long lived in peace, now at loggerheads, with no certainty about how or when this ends. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Westminster.
Well, joining me now to discuss the West's response are Mark Stone in Washington, Adam Parsons in Brussels. But first, Beth is with us in Westminster. And Beth, I mean, the reality is that swinging sanctions are the only weapon they have.
Yes, that's right, Mark. Look, all allies and Western leaders have been clear that putting boots on the ground in Ukraine is not what they intend to do. They will add military support to NATO allies, but really, as you said, the route through here is sanctions. And the Prime Minister, with a very powerful statement in a House of Parliament where everyone was unified actually behind the Prime Minister. There had been criticism earlier in the week, hadn't there, that the sanctions were limited, too limited. But today, the Prime Minister unleashing what he claimed to be the largest and most severe set of sanctions Russia has ever seen. He called them ferocious. He said that there would be an asset freeze on the biggest banks. Russian citizens would have limits on deposits of up to £50,000 in the UK to try and limit wealthy Russians and their finances in London. Aeroflot was banned. High-tech exports to Russia banned. What hasn't been settled yet is the SWIFT payment system, whether Russia will be excluded from that. That would cripple Russia banks. It would make trade very difficult, not settled yet between G7 allies. That's still on the table, the Prime Minister said. And really, what are they doing, the allies, as they do these sanctions? It's a remorseless mission, in the words of the Prime Minister, to squeeze Russia from the global economy piece by piece. But it's going to take some time, and it won't see off those military incursions. This is a much longer-term project. But the Prime Minister said his unflinching goal will be to make sure Putin's venture fails. But this could take months and months to unfold.
OK, Beth, thank you very much. Let's go to Mark Stone in Washington. And Mark, Joe Biden sending more American troops to Europe. And of course, this fear exists, doesn't it, of a wider conflict?
Of course it does. And I think it was absolutely the subtext of what he has been saying today and of his messages over the course of the past few weeks. It is that ultimate fear that goes back so many decades, a confrontation between the United States, the West, and Russia, something that so many presidents have had to contemplate with, but you have to go back to the Cuban Missile Crisis and JFK to get to a moment as close to this one, I think. You know, Joe Biden has been criticised, or people have wondered whether he is too old to be president. Well, I think today his age gives him a unique perspective, or a vital perspective on history as he contemplates what to do now. And what can he do? As you say, sanctions are the only weapon that they have got, precisely because Russia is a nuclear power. And they know, and they heard that extraordinary veiled, or was it not that veiled, threat from President Putin last night, when he warned anyone who gets involved and tries to do anything about what he has done in Ukraine. He warned them of consequences that they will never have felt before. What did that mean? He was asked that in his news conference. Was that a threat of nuclear war? That is what President Biden was asked an hour or so ago. And he said, I don't know what President Putin is threatening, but I know what he has done. In terms of the practicalities, well, he has announced further sanctions. Yes, he fell short of announcing any sort of cutting off of the SWIFT payment system, but he said that the sanctions that they're putting in place are actually greater and more powerful than cutting off the SWIFT payment system. People will argue either way on that one. But he also made it quite clear that, remember, Ukraine is not a NATO member, but the countries next door are. And he said any attack on any NATO member, on one NATO member, is an attack on all of them. And to that end, he is moving yet more troops to the eastern flank of NATO to buttress the NATO defences.
Mark, thank you very much. Let's have a quick word then with Adam Parsons in Brussels. And Adam, European leaders meeting again tonight.
Yes, they are. They are discussing sanctions a new raft of sanctions that will be imposed. And I have to say, that when they arrived and gave some introductory thoughts, normally this is quite a sort of bullish political statement, sometimes a little bit stale. Tonight was anything but that. We saw a succession, particularly of leaders from Eastern Europe, who looked frightened, I have to say. One of them, the Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas, say everything that was predicted actually happened. We hoped it wouldn't, but it did. The situation is grave. She talked about people being taken to Siberia in 1947 from her country, and was, she said, incredulous that history was repeating itself. And also the Polish Prime Minister Morawiecki saying Europe is buying lots of Russian gas, lots of Russian oil. President Putin is taking money from us, and he's turning this into aggression, into invasion, and destabilizing the whole of Europe. President Putin doesn't have a friend in the place at the moment. And the question is how will they respond? They will not turn for Russia out of the SWIFT system. That won't happen, even though I understand a considerable majority of EU members do want that. This will be about finance and transport, airspace, visas, and more sanctions on more banks. They say it will hurt a lot, but will it include SWIFT? No, it won't.
OK, Adam, thank you very much indeed. Thanks to Beth Rigby and to Mark Stone there in Washington. Well, joining me now is Baroness Ashton, former EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. Thank you very much for being with us. And I think my first question is, how dangerous a moment is this for this continent?
Extremely dangerous. You know, we've watched over these years the events that have unfolded around Ukraine. I was in Kyiv, I can remember very well, throughout that period in 2013-14, and we were deeply concerned when we saw Russian troops moving into Crimea, and we did not know if they would stop there. And I think all of those feelings would have returned to those of us who were there then, in remembering that it was a moment of great crisis, and here we are in a situation which is significantly worse. We do not know what is in the mind of President Putin, where he's going to stop, and indeed what is going to happen over these coming days.
So is European security, as we have come to know it, in turmoil tonight?
I don't believe it's in turmoil. European security is very much looked after by NATO. The support of the United States and other NATO allies is deeply significant. Article 5 of NATO, an attack on one is an attack on all, is still extremely important. And there will be ongoing discussions in Brussels at NATO. We've seen already the Secretary General Stoltenberg talking about what NATO will be doing. And Europeans will be looking to that. What we are seeing is a determination in Ukraine that it will choose its own future. And in the end, this is the moment, in a sense, when President Putin may well have lost Ukraine forever.
Have the West been played by Putin on this issue for years? Has the West indulged Vladimir Putin, and this is the consequence?
I'm not sure I would use the word indulged. I think that there was an expectation over these years that a way of living on the same land, on the continent, could be found that recognised that Europe had its concerns and that Russia had its own concerns too. These issues of whether all of the nations that were former Soviet Union countries that joined the EU also joined NATO have been in discussion with Russia for a long time. These are issues in terms of the offer that has been made by the Americans, for example, about communication, about transparency, about building through confidence building measures, the way in which we operate together. So I don't think he's been indulged. But I do think we are all actually surprised that we've reached this point.
And what about this question that Joe Biden has raised about him not stopping with Ukraine and going on to threaten NATO countries?
Well, I think this is something that obviously will be much in the mind of everybody, the leaders meeting in Brussels tonight of the European Union, but of course at NATO headquarters as well. Things are changing in the region. If you look at what was happening in Belarus 2 years ago, this ambition, that Belarus would become some kind of Eastern version of Switzerland, the place where discussion would take place and crises would be solved. Look at it now. Here it is with Russian troops coming through its territory, participating, if you like, in everything that's going on. Look what's happened in Kazakhstan, the changes there under the new president. It's not a region that is remaining the same. It is in flux.
Okay, Baroness Ashton, thank you very much for your time this evening. And before we go, just a piece of breaking news we're getting, and the Health Ministry here in Kyiv is saying that 57 people have been killed in these days in the violence today and 169 injured. It has been a very dark day in Ukraine. The huge invasion began in the early hours of this morning, and now, 14 or 15 hours later, things are calm here at the moment, but people just fear what is to come. Much more at the top of the hour.